All right.
Thank you for joining the National Environment Agency online. This resource material has been prepared for use during the 2021 game bird shooting season. The 2021 game bird hunting season is declared to open on Saturday, 21 August 2021 and close on Sunday, 26 September 2021. It was declared via the Wildlife Protection Game Birds Declaration of Shooting Season Order 2021. This brief video will focus on the laws administered by the NEPA and the Jamaica Constabulary Force. The first presentation will be given by the Legal and Enforcement Division and will focus on the legal framework that governs the season. The second will be given by the Environmental Management and Conservation Division and will focus on, amongst other things, the game birds, which may be hunted during the season and their environments. Your feedback is welcomed. Please click the link in the description below. And now we turn to the Legal and Enforcement Division.
My name is Stuart Anton, and I will be starting the presentation by looking at the legal background behind the bird shooting season. I'll be joined later on by Mr. Matty Ricketts, who will finish the second half of my presentation, our presentation. Now, just to give a brief look at the order of the presentation, we'll start by looking at who is NEPA. I'll give you a brief synopsis of the Wildlife Protection Act, specifically and this year's game bird order, shooting order, the birds which are permitted to be hunted during the season, the bag count and the designated shooting sessions, and the breaches of the Wildlife Protection Act and the game sanctuaries. While Mr. Ricketts will look on the assistance required from the Jamaica Constabulary Force, as well as the powers of wardens and of game wardens and officers under the Act, the Wildlife Protection Act. Now, the National Environmental and Planning Agency is regarded as the primary body with responsibility for the environment in Jamaica. It's an executive agency established under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation and by virtue of the Executive Agencies Act. NEPA is the agent for three statutory bodies: the Land Development and Utilization Commission, the Town and Country Planning Authority, and the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, or the NRCA, which is bolded here because for the purposes of the game bird season, the Natural Resources Conservation Authority is the main arm. Now, the Wildlife Protection Act is the legislation which regulates the bird shooting season. And this act is administered by the NRCA, which is why, as stated before, it's the main legislation which we'll focus on. Now, it creates the offenses for hunting, possession, and sale of any protected species. Among other things, this act also prohibits the discharge of pollution into water bodies which contain flora or fauna, well, protected flora and fauna. The 2021 bird shooting order was passed a short while ago, and it states that during the season, 4 specific game birds may be hunted during the season. And as stated before by Ms. Lee Shung, it starts on this Saturday, August 21st, 2021, and ends on Sunday, September 26, 2021. These are the 4 birds which the order allows to be hunted during the season: the white-winged dove, the pea dove, the mourning dove, and the white-crowned pigeon, or baldpate. Every weekend, we'll have 3 shooting sessions: Saturday mornings from sunrise to 9 a.m. and Saturday afternoons from 2:30 to sunset. And again, another session on Sunday mornings from sunrise to 9 a.m. There is no afternoon shooting session on Sunday, and there's no shooting sessions allowed outside of these time periods. Any hunting outside of those time periods is a breach of the legislation, and hunters may be charged. During the sessions, hunters are allowed to shoot up to 20 birds total per session. However, no more than 15 of those birds can be baldpates. So that means that you can either have 20 birds which are not baldpates, so any of the other 3 types of birds, you can have up to 20. Or you can have 15 baldpates only, or you can have 20 birds, which is consisted of 15 baldpates and 5 of the other selection of birds. If somebody has any more than that number of birds, they have breached legislation and they may be charged under the Act. It is illegal to hunt in game reserves. There are a number of game reserves across the island. However, just a few of them include the Greater Morass in Holland Bay, St. Thomas, the Greater Portmore Game Reserve, Cabarita Point Game Reserve in St. Catherine, Amity Hall Game Reserve in St. Catherine, the Upper and Lower Morasses of Black River, St. Elizabeth, the Bogue Lagoon Creek in St. James, and the Ferry Hill Game Reserve in Port Antonio. There are several more game reserves, and they're usually represented by signs which have been placed there by NEPO. However, if you need further clarification on where these reserves are, feel free to contact us and we'll provide you with such a listing and maps. Each game reserve also has a 50-meter wide protective zone around the game reserve. There is no hunting in the protective zone, as in the game reserve as well. As stated before, there are a number of breaches to the Wildlife Protection Act in relation to bird shooting, one of which is the hunting of game birds during the close season. As stated before, there are only 3 hunting sessions allowed each weekend. Any hunting outside of those 3 sessions is actually a breach of the Act, and the hunter may face fines. Hunting of any game birds other than those 4 which were listed before is a breach of the Act, and the hunter may also face fines. Hunting any other protected birds, meaning we have our protected parrots, we also have protected ducks, and several other local birds which are endemic and protected to Jamaica. Any hunting of those birds will be prosecuted, and the hunter may face a fine as a result. And also hunting without a hunter's license is another issue in which you may face a fine as well. The hunter's license is to be treated in the same way as a firearm license, and it should be with the hunter at all times during the hunt. A failure to have your hunter's license on your person is actually a breach of that. And if you're requested to show your license by an authorized officer or by the game warden and you're unable to do that and you are hunting, that is a breach of the legislation, even if you have your firearms license, and you may be charged under that. And finally, as stated before, hunting in a game reserve or sanctuary is also a breach of the Wildlife Protection Act. If you're convicted for any of these offenses, there is a maximum charge of $100,000 or a term of imprisonment. And however, we have stated $50,000 to $100,000 as the range, because that's where we have seen judges have usually been fining people. I'll now move on to Mr. Ricketts, who will touch on the assistance we need from the JCF.
Okay, pleasant day, everyone. My name is Matthew Ricketts, as stated before. I'm a legal officer here at NEPA, and I'll be touching on the ways the JCF assists the NEPA officers during the hunting season. Now, firstly, the sub-officers are called upon to detail sufficient police officers who work with the NEPA team for the duration of the season. And we'll also be encouraging sub-officers to actively participate in these sessions as well. So assistance is garnered from both officers and sub-officers. Now, these officers, along with the game wardens, have certain powers under the legislation during the bird shooting season. So I'll touch on the first power here, which is the power to enter land. Now, if a game warden or constable suspects that an offense has been committed or is about to be committed at any time of the day or night, he or she may enter, remain upon, and traverse any land. Now, this goes for private and public properties. So this is one of the powers that the JCF, as well as the game wardens, have during this time. Another power I'll touch on briefly is the power to stop and search. Now, in any public place, any crown land or on any game sanctuary, the powers available to the officers as well as NEPA personnel is to search any person who he or she has reasonable cause to suspect has disobeyed any provisions in the Act or these regulations. And that's taken from Section 16 of the Wildlife Protection Act. We'll move forward to the next power, which is the power to search. And this power comes, as defined, is the power to stop and search any vehicle, boat, or other conveyance or commercial cold storage which he or she has good cause to suspect contains an animal, bird, fish, bird nest, bird egg, or any weapon or trap used in the commission of an offense. That's also taken from Section 16 of the Wildlife Protection Act. And of course, the picture you see there was of an officer searching the trunk of a vehicle. Now, in relation to the power of search, there has been, there have been, I should say, there's quite a bit of case law on it. And we've just taken an extract here from Justice Batts, who is a Supreme Court judge in the decision of Hemans and the Attorney General. It's a 2013 case coming from the Jamaica Supreme Court. And the citation is there below. And in this ruling, Justice Batts, in his wisdom, speaks to the fact that reasonable cause to suspect an individual, he just defined what reasonable cause is, and it's where an individual is about to commit a crime, and it must relate to some peculiar characteristic of the person or persons, or the vehicle he or she is driving, or the manner in which it is operated, or to any information received. So that just gives a better idea as to what reasonable cause is. It is vital to actually, if we can just go back for 1 second, right? It is vital to just pay key attention to this particular slide, because we can break it down to say that there are certain elements that are interchangeable, and of course they can be cumulative as well. So one, let's go again. It's about to commit a crime. It must relate to the peculiar characteristics of the persons or the vehicle he's driving, or the manner in which it is operated, or any information that may have been received. So reasonable cause, again, has to come with some form of reason. And it's not just a blind power where you just see a random vehicle. For example, you might see a Toyota Prado in a particular area. And let us say that it's a Prado, there's nothing else to distinguish it, to basically cause you to go ahead and search that vehicle. But if it's picked at random, that would not be in line with what Justice Batts is saying is the current position of the law. Now, if, for example, you are seeing a vehicle and the vehicle has occupants on it in camouflage, you may be seeing shotguns or rifles in the vehicle or pointing out the window. You may even spot a pickup truck with a cooler on it. Certain things like that may increase the cause, your reasonable cause to basically apprehend or stop the vehicle, I should say, and conduct a search. So it is very important that we pay attention to the other peculiar characteristics of the persons of the vehicle, or the vehicle itself, or the manner in which it's operated, so that you can invoke this power to search. All right, so moving on to the next slide, the power to detain. Now, this power essentially is for persons who are committing or reasonably suspected of committing an offense. A warden may, without a warrant, stop and detain him. If the name is not known, the warden may, without warrant, apprehend any person and take him into custody at the nearest police station. Now, again, this has to do with some form of reason as well. It's very important to not use this power willy-nilly, because to detain a person incorrectly or not within the bounds of the law can result in a suit being taken or filed against the person for what we call malicious prosecution and or false imprisonment. Well, false imprisonment mainly in these cases. So it is very important, again, this comes from Section 17 of the Wildlife Protection Act. This power to detain is used carefully, right? So you have to ensure that there is reason that the person is committing an offense or is reasonably suspected of committing an offense before approaching anyone without a warrant to stop and detain that person. All right, now another power is the power of forfeiture. Now, any animal, this is taken from section 23 of the Wildlife Protection Act. Any animal, bird, or fish, or part of any animal, bird, or fish, any vehicle, boat, gun, catapult, or other weapon or trap, once it's used or it's seized during the commission of any offense of the Wildlife Protection Act, and said person is actually convicted of same, it is within discretion of the court to forfeit these items listed above to the crown, which is to the government. Now, again, it can happen where, for example, someone is maybe was shooting a bird, right? And it was a bird either in situations where it was over the count, or a bird which was protected and should not have been hunted in the first place. That animal or the carcass of it can be forfeited to the court. Likewise, a vehicle, gun, etc., that was used in the commission of that offense can be forfeited to the crown. All right, now these are just some illustrations of NEPA officers and JCF officers in the field. Just from the pictures here, seen there, the picture to the right is a NEPA officer inspecting a bird rack to see it would be whether the count itself is within the bounds of the permitted animals or the permitted birds that one can shoot, and also to inspect to see what birds are being shot, to see whether they fall under the category of the 4 game birds that were mentioned as permitted during the bird shooting season. And another picture to the left now just shows officers in the field going about their merry way to, maybe perhaps go to an inspection, or just traversing game sanctuaries or other grounds, just to enforce the law and to uphold it. All right, no, and as mentioned before, the JCF officers provide assistance to the NEPA officers. And these are just more pictures where we have of spot and road checks. I mentioned earlier about the reasonable cause or some reasonable suspicion. So for example, the bottom picture you're seeing there to the right, you see some JCF officers as well as some NEPA officers conducting a search of a vehicle. Now, one of the occupants, or both of them you can see, are in camouflage material or apparel. So you can see that there was some sort of reasonable cause to stop that vehicle to exercise that power. Likewise, in the top left, you see JCF officers as well as NEPA personnel inspecting hunters' licenses and etc., the contents of that vehicle there. So it just goes to show, just to kind of have an idea as to what it may look like in so quote unquote real life, as to what these powers, how they're to be conducted, how they're to be used. All right, now there are a couple other things to note before I close off the presentation from the LED. Now there are situations where birds that are protected or declared protected under the Wildlife Protection Act are actually hunted during the season and out. One particular example is the ring-tailed pigeon. Now, I know Ricardo will, from ecosystems, will touch on exactly how to identify these birds, but the ring-tailed pigeon, for argument's sake, has been reported to be hunted in parishes such as Portland. I do know of situations where persons have been hunting these game birds, well, not these birds, they're not game birds, but birds. They tend to be a little larger. So persons have been, for whatever reason, whether it's mistakenly or knowingly, hunting ring-tailed pigeons. Also, other things to note is gun etiquette. Now, whilst inspections are being conducted, whilst JCF officers and NEPA personnel are approaching hunters, we want to remind everybody to ensure that gun etiquette is followed. We wouldn't want anybody to have their weapons pointed in the wrong direction and breaching any of the firearm safety rules. So it's just important to maintain gun etiquette and to ensure that these persons are maintaining it as well. Also for timing and coordination of the teams. Now, the times, as mentioned before, range from sunrise to 9 a.m. for Saturdays and Sundays. And believe me when I say that hunters are very efficient in grabbing their birds. So it is important that timing and coordination is maintained, because you wouldn't want a situation to arise where you're at a site at 8:30 when hunters have already packed up and gone from 6:30, right? So it's important to get there for sunrise to ensure that you are able to monitor and enforce the provisions of the law, right? Yes, and now with that being said, I'm going to hand off to Ricardo Miller, and he will continue the presentation and allow us to be familiarized with some of the birds that you'll encounter.
Thank you, Matthew Ricketts and Stuart Panton from the Legal Enforcement Division, LED, for setting the framework for my presentation. My name is Ricardo Miller. I'm the Environmental Coordinator for Fauna in the Ecosystems Management Branch. And my presentation will be about the game birds and the game reserves as a means to prepare us for the 2021 game bird hunting season. There are 4 species of birds that may be hunted. These are the white-crowned pigeon, the white-winged dove, the Zenaida dove, and the mourning dove. These birds are readily identified by their beak, their head, their body size, and their plumage, meaning the colors of their feathers. They all belong to a family of birds called the Columbidae, or pigeons and doves. And I would like to add that there are 10 species of pigeons and doves that are native to Jamaica. However, only 4 are being allowed under the Wildlife Protection Act to be hunted. The remaining 6 are protected. The first game bird I have here is the white-crowned pigeon, more popularly known as the Baldpate. This bird has an overall gray, dark gray, or we sometimes say slate gray plumage. That's the color of its feathers. And it has a prominent white head. I would like to add that the white head is usually in the mature birds, and it's only the male that gets a full white head. Female may have a slightly grayish head, while the immature may not show any white at all, but just a little bit of gray, mainly towards the beak. The back of the neck, also called the nape, is very scaly in appearance and can be very iridescent, showing reflections of green and purple and other colors. It's a relatively large bird. In fact, it's the largest of the 4 game birds that we have. It is a very arboreal species, meaning it loves trees. It tends to stay in trees. This bird does not readily go to ground. In areas where people hunt and they do seeded fields by throwing corn or rice to attract birds, this bird would not be amongst those birds that go to ground to feed on those. It prefers dry coastal forests, inland woodlands, wet forests, and areas with large trees. It flies in small groups or sometimes singly. The next bird is the white-winged dove. This bird is quite different from the white-crowned pigeon. It is brown in color, a light brown. It has a blue line along the edge of the wing, which gives it its name, the white-winged dove. It also has what we call a black ear mark right behind the eye and below it. And around the eye, there's a fleshy area called the occipital ring that is blue in color. And this is very important in identifying the species, especially from just the head. This bird tends to flock in large numbers and can be seen in 10s, 20s, hundreds, or even thousands. The third game bird is the Zenaida dove, also called the pea dove, or even sometimes referred to as the ground dove. This bird is usually on the ground. It is very similar in appearance to the white-winged dove in that it is brown overall, that is, it has a brown plumage, but this brown is usually a deeper, richer brown. And note that it does not have any white running along the edge of the wing. Instead, it has a single white spot on the wing, as can be seen in this picture. This white spot extends to a white band on the trailing edge of the wing when the bird is in flight. It has two ear marks, two black ear marks. One is more prominent than the other. As you can see in that picture, there's a bright dark mark below and behind the eye. There's another mark just behind the eye, which is not very visible in this particular picture. The nape, the back of the neck, is purplish and iridescent. And the deeper purple it is also gives an indication of what sex it is. The deeper purple is actually a male, while the female doesn't really get that iridescent. The bird in this picture is a male. It is often seen singly or in pairs, so this bird doesn't move in large flocks at all. The fourth and final game bird is the mourning dove, more affectionately called the paloma, which I might add is Spanish for pigeon or dove. And it's also called the long-tailed pea-dove. It all depends on which part of the island you are. But the proper English name is the mourning dove. It has a light brown plumage, and it actually looks very similar to the white-winged dove and the Zenaida dove I mentioned earlier. However, you will notice that there is no white in the wing. There's no white running along the edge of the wing, as in the white-winged dove, and there is no white spot, as in the Zenaida dove. It also has a small ear mark, as you can see in the picture. But if you look around the eye, the occipital ring, that fleshy area without any feathers around the eye, is not blue like in the white-winged dove. Instead, it is a creamish color. The overall bird is slightly lighter in color than those two birds, being a little creamish. It has a much longer tail, which spreads out into a wedge shape in flight. The bird is slender in build. Now, this is an image of the heads of these four game birds. This is important because, according to the Wildlife Protection Act, a hunter needs to leave a fully feathered head of the bird they've hunted for inspection. In other words, they may pluck all the feathers off the bird, but they must leave the head intact. So, as enforcement officers going in the field, we should be able to identify these four species from just the head. The bird in the bottom left corner is the white-crowned pigeon or Baldpate, which is readily identifiable with a white head and very dark, almost black plumage. The bird on the top left is the Zenaida dove with the two ear marks, two black ear marks, and a little purple along the neck. The bird in the right, the top right, is the mourning dove, which has one small ear mark, and it has that creamish occipital ring, the fleshy area around the eye. The bird to the bottom right is fairly distinctive, the white-winged dove, which has that blue occipital ring and a single and very prominent ear mark. Make note of these pictures, as this is important in identifying the birds in the field. Now I will talk about the protected birds. The Wildlife Protection Act states quite clearly that all birds in Jamaica are protected, except one, the four game birds when a hunting season is declared, and only that you have a license to hunt them. In other words, these four game birds are protected outside of the hunting season and outside of times where hunting is not allowed. Outside of times where hunting is allowed. The second set of birds that are not protected are non-native introduced species that number about 20 of them. We are constantly updating this list. They include some domesticated species, but they also include birds that have escaped from storms such as Hurricane Gilbert and so forth, or simply let loose due to the pet trade and have become established in the wild. They're now breeding and have an established population. These include rock pigeons, which is also called rock doves, which is also called domestic pigeon. It's your everyday pigeon that someone would raise in the rural areas in a pigeon coop, or you can see in built-up areas on roofs and so forth. The next one is the Eurasian collar dove. Some people call them the barbel dove. Things like chickens, turkeys, those things are not protected. They're not protected birds. Now, I would like to just touch on 6 other protected birds. And these 6 birds are the remaining 6 columbids, the remaining 6 pigeons and doves that are native to Jamaica. You may recall I said that there are 10 pigeons and doves that are native to Jamaica. 4 of them are game birds, other 6 are protected. The reason I'm emphasizing these 6, because these are the ones that are most likely to be confused when you are examining the birds of the hunters. If a hunter has a parrot, for example, it is quite obvious that it is a parrot. If a hunter has a ring-tailed pigeon, it might be a little bit more challenging. So these 6 pigeons and doves that are protected are the ring-tailed pigeon, the Caribbean dove, also called the white belly, the crested quail dove, also referred to as a mountain witch, or sometimes the blue dove, the ruddy quail dove, which is called the partridge, and the plain pigeon, which is called the blue pigeon. There is also the common ground dove, just simply referred to as ground dove. Now, the ring-tailed pigeon is a very arboreal species. It tends to stay in the trees. It is found in mountainous areas such as the Blue and Jonker Mountains National Park and areas of Portland and St. Thomas in those hilly areas, and where the forest actually extends to the coast in those areas, you can find them. They're also found in the cockpit country areas of Trelawney, St. Anne, northern sections of St. Elizabeth, and so forth. The ring-tailed pigeon is larger than the white-crowned pigeon. That's one of the first identifications. It's a really large pigeon. It has a creamish belly and a very, well, not very, but slightly darker wing, as you can see in the picture with the bird on the left, how that dark wing contrasts with the sort of creamish beige belly and breast of this bird. It has a very short bill, a red eye, and an iridescent nape. That's the back of the neck, which is green and bluish in color when the light hits it right. The tail, which gives it its name, has a dark band across it, which gives the name ring-tailed pigeon. You can see on the bird on the right, that dark band just towards the base of the tail, while the tip is lighter in color. This bird is endemic to Jamaica, meaning it is only found in Jamaica, and hence one of the main reasons why it is a protected species. The Caribbean dove, also called the white belly for obvious reasons, is unmistakable. It has whiter belly, whitish head, and very iridescent, colorful neck, back of the neck. The rest of the bird, the wings and back, is fairly brown and uniform in color. This bird is found mainly on the ground and flies very low and through the forest. It is not a good game bird species, as hunters would need to be firing very horizontally to shoot a bird like this. So this is one of the main reasons why this bird is not included as a game bird. So the Caribbean dove, or white belly, is a protected species. The crested quail dove is another ground-dwelling bird. It frequents the ground and it flies very low and through the forest. It prefers very dense, dark forests such as the cockpit country or the Blue and Jonker Mountains area. And it is very distinctive in that it has a purplish back and certain sections of the wing are purplish. But look at that head. It has a crested helmet-shaped head with a black forehead. The belly is gray in color, while the wings have a rusty brown or rufous color in the feathers, as well as on the vent. That's the area underneath the tail. The crested quail dove is endemic to Jamaica and is a protected species. The fourth pigeon and dove is the ruddy quail dove. This bird also prefers to be on the ground, where it likes to camouflage itself in dried leaf litter. That brown coloration blends very well with the leaf, and so it's very difficult to spot this bird. This image is of a female. You will notice it also has a whitish mark, whitish line under the eye, and around the neck, halfway around the neck. And that is a very distinctive mark of the ruddy quail dove. This one is a female because the male actually gets much deeper reddish brown in color, very rusty in color. It is not endemic to Jamaica, but again, it would not make a very good game bird because it doesn't fly more than a few feet above the ground, and it is restricted to deep forest. The next protected pigeon and dove is the plain pigeon, also called the blue pigeon. As you can see, it is very purplish in color on the head and on the breast, grayish back with a little purple to rust color on the wings. You will also note that it has a slight whitish color on the edge of the wing, similar to the white-winged dove we mentioned earlier. However, this white is very subtle. It is a fairly large pigeon, larger than the white-crowned pigeon and about the same size as a ring-tailed pigeon. It is an extremely rare bird on the island and is mainly found within the cockpit country, but it will often venture out into areas such as Falmouth and Trelawney or south into St. Elizabeth. It is quite unlikely that hunters would encounter this bird. The final native pigeon and dove is the common ground dove. This is a very small dove. It's an extremely small bird, probably about 4 or so inches long, and it prefers to stay on the ground, as the name suggests. Because of its size and its behavior, it does not make a very good game bird. This is a protected species. You will notice the pattern on the head is very scaly in appearance on the head, back of the neck, and on the breast. The wings have a bit of rufous or reddish brown color on the primary feathers, which is much more visible when the bird is in flight. Again, this is a protected species. Now I would like to mention 2 other pigeons and doves which are not protected. These birds were introduced into the island of Jamaica and therefore fall under Schedule 2 of the Wildlife Protection Act as being a non-protected species. The first one is a rock pigeon, or your everyday domestic pigeon. This bird is very urban in its behavior. It tends to stay within an urban setting or semi-urban setting. However, in rural areas where people tend to raise these, they can actually fly out into the forest, and a hunter may encounter one very rarely while hunting other birds. This bird is not protected, and therefore it would not be an offense if the hunter has this bird in his possession. The next bird is the Eurasian collared dove. This bird, we suspect, has self-introduced itself into the island, meaning it has expanded from other islands where it was introduced and slowly made its way over to Jamaica, where its numbers are now increasing in the wild. It's been noted in places such as St. Anne, in Negril, and in southern sections of St. Elizabeth, such as the Treasure Beach area, where the numbers are increasing. It is a very light beige in color, and it has a prominent dark mark at the back of the neck. This bird is not protected, and therefore it would not be an offense if the hunter has this bird in their possession. However, I would like to point out that it is extremely unlikely that these birds will be shot, as their numbers are low and they tend to stay within a fairly urban or semi-urban setting. However, if someone is in doubt, please contact NEPA for clarification and provide images so we may guide you accordingly. That ends the first half of the presentation on game birds. The second section, which is much shorter, will look at game reserves. There are 19 game reserves or game sanctuaries in Jamaica. And around these boundaries, we are supposed to recognize a 50-meter buffer zone. This is written within the Wildlife Protection Act, that no hunting should occur within the game reserve or within this 50-meter buffer zone around each game reserve. All forest reserves, which are designated by the Forestry Department, are also designated as game reserves. And these are quite numerous, I might add. Therefore, no hunting is allowed within forest reserves. They are clearly marked with signs and are often very deep forest areas. The Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park and newly declared World Heritage Site is also in no hunting area. This map gives a quick overview of the protected areas or the no hunting areas in Jamaica. The light green colors, such as on the extreme western end in Negril, are game reserves. You can see more game reserves in St. Elizabeth in the southwest. However, the large dark green area in the center is the cockpit country, which is the game reserves. The yellow areas in the east are the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park. This is a quick image of the game reserves in the eastern section of the island. In the very eastern section, on the very tip of the island, is the Holland Bay Game Reserve. And in the south, on the western section, is the Peak Bay and Portland Bight Game Reserve. Now, more details on these game reserves can be found in the Game Bird Hunters Handbook, and you can also contact NEPA for more information on these game reserves. On the western side of the island, these are the game reserves that there are. As I mentioned, there is a Negril Great Morass Game Reserve in the west, and there are game reserves around the wetlands of Black River in St. Elizabeth on the south. Detailed information about these game reserves is outlined in the Hunter's Handbook, and I encourage everyone to get a copy of the Hunter's Handbook from NEPA. In addition, you may also contact NEPA for Google Maps add-on of all the 19 game reserves and the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park boundaries, which will be added to your Google profile so you may access them in Google Maps on your phone. So you'll get real-time position as to where you are in relation to the game reserves. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. I hope that these online materials prove useful to our stakeholders. We wish you happy hunting.